My name is Diane, and for 43 years I thought I understood my daughter better than anyone else on this earth. Sophie was the kind of child other parents warned their kids to be more like. Straight A's without me ever raising my voice about homework. A full scholarship to law school. A junior partner position by 32 at one of the most respected firms in Charlotte. She called me every Sunday at exactly 6 o'clock without fail, just to talk about nothing. The weather, a book she was reading, whether I'd finally gotten around to fixing the fence gate her father built before he passed. I used to brag about her at church. I used to brag about her at the grocery store, to strangers, unprompted, the way only a proud mother can. "That's my daughter," I'd say, pointing at some article in the local paper about young professionals making a difference. "That's my Sophie." If you had asked me 8 months ago to describe the worst thing my daughter could possibly do, I would have laughed. Maybe she'd forget to visit for Christmas. Maybe she'd marry someone I didn't fully approve of. Those were the kinds of worries a mother like me carried. Small, manageable. The ordinary friction of loving an adult child who had her own life now. I never once imagined the truth. I need to back up and tell you about Richard, because none of this makes sense without him. Richard Whitfield had been my husband's best friend since they were 19 years old, working summers together at a lumber yard outside of town. When my husband Tom died of a heart attack 6 years ago, it was Richard who sat with me in the hospital waiting room until 3 in the morning. It was Richard who helped me sort through Tom's tools in the garage, who taught Sophie to drive a stick shift when she was 17 because Tom traveled too much for work to do it himself. Richard was family, not by blood, but by every measure that actually counts. He'd been married to Karen for 26 years. They had 2 boys, both grown now, both living out of state. Karen ran a small bakery downtown, the kind of place where she knew every regular's order by heart. I'd gone to that bakery every week for over a decade. Karen and I weren't best friends, but we were something warm and steady. We'd sit at the little corner table some Saturday mornings and talk about our husbands, our kids, the particular exhaustion of growing older in a town where everyone still remembered you as young. Richard used to joke that Sophie was basically his 3rd child. He'd shown up to her law school graduation. He'd walked her down the aisle at her mock wedding when she was 7 years old and Tom was out of town. A silly backyard ceremony with her stuffed animals as guests, and Richard playing along without a second of hesitation because that's who he was. That's who I thought he was. The first crack in the picture came in March, though I didn't recognize it as a crack at the time. Sophie mentioned, almost in passing during one of our Sunday calls, that she'd run into Uncle Richard for coffee. It struck me as sweet. A little unusual, maybe. Sophie was a busy woman, and coffee with her father's old friend wasn't exactly a typical Tuesday activity, but I didn't think anything of it. Richard had always kept an eye on her. Why wouldn't he grab coffee with the daughter of his best friend? Then it happened again in April. And again in May, this time dinner, not coffee, and this time she didn't mention it until I asked directly why she'd canceled our regular Sunday call. "I was out with Richard," she said. "We lost track of time." Something in her voice made me pause. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said his name. Softer than she used to, almost careful, like she was handling something fragile. I told myself I was imagining things. Mothers do that. We invent problems out of thin air because we're terrified of the real ones. I had no idea how right and how wrong that instinct would turn out to be. By June, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Sophie stopped answering her phone on the first ring, something she'd never done before. She grew cagey about her weekends. Once, when I called on a Saturday afternoon just to chat, I could hear a man's voice in the background. Low, familiar, laughing at something she'd said. And when I asked who she was with, she said, "Just a coworker," so quickly that the lie practically had its own heartbeat. Around the same time, Karen started acting strange too, though I only put it together later. She canceled our Saturday coffee twice in a row, which she'd never done in 10 years. When I finally caught her at the bakery, she looked thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with early mornings and flour on her hands. "Is everything all right with you and Richard?" I asked her, mostly out of genuine concern. She stared at the espresso machine for a long moment before answering. "He's been distant," she said. "Working late, taking calls in the other room. You know how it is after this many years. Sometimes you just drift." I told her that all marriages had seasons like that. I told her Tom and I had gone through a rough patch in our 20s before we found our footing again. I said all the comforting, useless things you say when you don't yet know you're comforting the wrong person about the wrong problem. The truth arrived on a Tuesday evening in late June, and it arrived the way truth usually does, sideways, uninvited, and utterly without mercy. I had driven to Sophie's apartment to drop off a container of her grandmother's peach cobbler, something I did every summer when the peaches came in. I didn't call ahead because I never had to. Sophie kept a spare key hidden for me under the flower pot, and I'd let myself in more times than I could count over the years, usually to find her working at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal briefs. This time I heard voices before I even got the door open. Richard's voice, and Sophie's, laughing, low and easy in a way I recognized from somewhere I couldn't quite place. And then I placed it. It was the way she used to laugh with boys in high school, right before something turned serious. I stood frozen in the hallway with the cobbler in my hands, telling myself there was an explanation. Maybe he'd stop by to help with something. Maybe I was about to walk in and feel foolish for the ugly thought that had already, despite every effort not to, formed itself in my mind. I opened the door. I wish I could tell you it was a misunderstanding. I wish I could tell you they were sitting at opposite ends of the room, fully clothed, doing nothing more scandalous than sharing a bottle of wine between old friends. I cannot tell you that. What I saw in that kitchen took the air out of my lungs so completely that I don't remember dropping the cobbler dish. I only remember the sound of glass shattering against the floor, and both of their faces turning toward me at the exact same moment. Richard's going white, Sophie's going the particular shade of red that only comes from being caught in something you knew the entire time was wrong. Nobody said anything for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 seconds. Then I heard myself ask the only question that mattered. How long? "Mom, it's not what it looks like," Sophie said, which is, I have since learned, the single most predictable sentence in the English language, spoken exclusively by people for whom it is exactly what it looks like. "Don't," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "Don't you dare stand in this kitchen and lie to my face." Richard tried to speak. I don't even remember what he said. Some fragment of an apology, some attempt to explain. But I remember cutting him off, because I could not, in that moment, look at him without seeing Tom's coffin, without remembering him carrying it, without remembering every single dinner at my table where he'd sat across from me pretending to be a man of decency. "Get out," I told him. "Get out of my daughter's apartment, and you get nowhere near Karen tonight without telling her the truth yourself, or so help me, I will." He left. I watched him go, and some small, disgusted part of me noticed that he couldn't even meet my eyes on his way out the door. Then it was just me and Sophie, standing in a kitchen with shattered glass and peach cobbler pooling on the tile between us. And I finally let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding since the door swung open. "How long has this been going on?" She sat down at the table, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, My brilliant, accomplished daughter looked like a child who'd been caught doing something she knew deep down was indefensible. "Since February," she said quietly. 5 months. 5 months of Sunday phone calls where she'd told me about her week and left out the one detail that would have shattered my entire understanding of who she was. 5 months of watching Karen grow thinner and sadder at that bakery counter, all while knowing exactly why. "He's your father's best friend," I said. "He's Karen's husband. He walked you down the aisle at your pretend wedding when you were 7 years old, Sophie. Do you understand what you've done?" "I know how it looks," she said, "but it's not just—" She stopped herself, then tried again. "I've been so lonely, Mom. Work has consumed everything. I don't have time to date. I don't have time for anything. And Richard actually listens to me. He remembers things I say. He makes me feel like—" "Like what? Like a mistress?" The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. "You are 34 years old. You are a partner at a law firm. You built a career on understanding right from wrong, and you chose, Sophie, nobody forced you, to destroy a 26-year marriage because you were lonely?" She started crying then, and some deep, stubborn maternal instinct in me wanted to cross the kitchen and hold her the way I had every time she'd cried since she was a baby. I didn't move. For the first time in her entire life, I didn't move toward my daughter's tears, because I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that this time her tears weren't the ones that needed comforting. "Does Karen know?" I asked instead. "No," Sophie whispered. "She will by tomorrow," I said, "because I'm going to tell her myself, unless Richard has the decency to do it tonight, which I doubt." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, staring at nothing, replaying every Sunday phone call from the last 5 months, hunting for clues I'd missed, wondering how I'd raised a woman capable of this and never seen it coming. Around 10 the next morning, my phone rang. It was Karen. Her voice was hollow in a way I'd never heard before, not even at her own mother's funeral years ago. "Richard told me everything last night," she said. "He said you found them." "I did," I said. "Karen, I am so sorry. I had no idea until yesterday. I swear to you—" "I believe you," she said. She stopped. I could hear her breathing on the other end, trying to hold herself together. "I need you to know something, Diane. I'm not angry at you. But I don't know if I can look at Sophie again. And I don't know if I can look at you and not think of her." That sentence broke something in me that I don't think has fully healed since. Karen and I had built 10 years of Saturday mornings together. 10 years of small kindnesses, and in the space of one conversation, my daughter's choices had put a wall between us that might never come down. The town found out within the week, the way small towns always do. Someone at the bakery must have overheard something, or Richard's sons found out and told someone, or Karen simply couldn't hold the weight of it alone anymore and confided in a friend who couldn't keep it to herself. Whatever the source, by the following Sunday, it wasn't a secret anymore. Sophie called me in a panic. "People are talking about me at the firm," she said. "Someone sent an anonymous message to one of the partners. They're saying it could affect my case with the Hendricks account. The client found out and doesn't want homewrecker handling his family trust. His words, apparently." I felt something I am not proud of in that moment. A flicker of grim satisfaction, immediately followed by a wave of guilt for feeling it at all. This was still my daughter. I did not want to watch her career, the thing she'd worked her entire life to build, crumble because of 5 months of terrible judgment. But I also could not pretend that consequences weren't exactly what this situation called for. "Sophie," I said, You didn't think about consequences when you were sneaking around with a married man for 5 months. You don't get to be shocked that they've arrived. So you're on their side, she said, her voice cracking. There are no sides here, I told her. There's what happened, and there's what you do next. That's it. Richard, for his part, moved out of the house he'd shared with Karen for over 2 decades and into an extended stay motel on the edge of town. The kind of place people go when their entire life has just fallen apart and they haven't figured out what comes next. His sons, both grown men with families of their own, stopped speaking to him entirely. One of them posted something on social media, vague but unmistakable, about a parent who'd destroyed everything real for something that was never going to last. Karen filed for divorce 3 weeks later. 26 years ended by a piece of paper and a lawyer neither of them had ever imagined they'd need. August came, and with it a kind of quiet that felt heavier than any argument. Sophie and I still spoke, though our Sunday calls had lost whatever ease they used to carry. She was navigating fallout at the firm. The Hendricks account had indeed been pulled, and though her position wasn't formally in jeopardy, she told me the partners had started routing certain clients away from her, quietly, the way institutions do when they want to avoid a scandal without admitting one exists. I've lost friends, she told me one Sunday, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. People I thought I was close with. Turns out a lot of them were only ever close to the version of me that had it all together. I didn't offer her comfort right away. I let the silence sit there because I think some part of her needed to feel the actual weight of what she'd done before I could help her carry any of it. What about Richard? I finally asked. Are you still... No, she said quickly. We haven't spoken since the divorce was finalized. I think once everything actually fell apart, once it was real and not just something happening behind closed doors, neither of us could stand to look at each other. It's like the secret was the only thing holding it together. Once it wasn't a secret anymore, there was nothing left. I'd heard variations of that story before, from other people in other contexts. Affairs rarely survive the daylight. They live on stolen hours and locked doors, and when those disappear, so does whatever fragile thing people mistook for love. Do you understand now what you took from Karen? I asked her. Not just a husband, 26 years of trust, a version of her own history that she can't look back on the same way anymore. She has to wonder now how long it was really happening, whether their whole marriage was some kind of lie. I know, Sophie whispered. I think about her every day. I don't know how to ever make that right. You might not be able to, I told her honestly. Some things you can't fix. You can only carry the weight of them and try every day after to be someone who wouldn't do it again. I ran into Karen at the grocery store in early September. It was the first time we'd seen each other since that phone call in July. For a moment, I thought she might turn and walk the other way, and I wouldn't have blamed her if she had. Instead, she stopped. "How are you holding up?" she asked. And there was no venom in it, only a tired kind of grace that made me want to cry right there in the cereal aisle. "I don't know how to answer that," I admitted. "I'm angry at my daughter. I miss you. I don't know how to hold both of those at once." "Neither do I," Karen said. "I don't hate you, Diane. I want you to know that, but I don't think I can come back to the bakery table with you. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time." I told her I understood, and I meant it, even though it hurt more than almost anything else in this entire ordeal. It's been 8 months now since I opened that kitchen door and found my whole understanding of my daughter shattered on the floor, along with a dish of peach cobbler. Sophie is rebuilding, slowly. She left the firm eventually, not fired, but she said she couldn't keep working somewhere that treated her like a walking scandal. And honestly, I think part of her needed the distance to become someone different than who she'd been during those 5 months. She's at a smaller practice now, less prestigious, considerably more forgiving. She's in therapy, which I encouraged, and which I think has done more for her than any of the lectures I gave her in that kitchen. She still calls me every Sunday. The calls are different now, quieter, more honest, less performative than the ones we used to have when I thought I knew everything about her life. I think, in a strange way, I know her better now than I did when I believed she was perfect. Perfect daughters don't need forgiveness. Real ones sometimes do. Richard, I hear, moved 2 towns over. I don't know much beyond that, and I don't ask. Some bridges once burned are better left as ash. Karen and I are finding our way back to something, slowly. Not the same as before. I don't think it ever will be. But a few weeks ago, she waved me over to her table at the bakery, and we sat together for 20 minutes, talking about nothing in particular, the way we used to. It felt like standing on a bridge that used to hold both our full weight, and now can only hold a little at a time. But it's something. It's more than I expected to have. I think about that night in Sophie's kitchen more often than I'd like to admit. I think about how certain I was for 34 years that I understood exactly who my daughter was. I've learned since then that love and understanding aren't always the same thing. That you can raise someone with everything you have and still be blindsided by the choices they make as an adult. Choices that are entirely their own, born from their own loneliness, their own selfishness, their own capacity for both good and harm that exists independent of anything I did or didn't teach them. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive Sophie for what she did to Karen, to Richard's sons, to that entire family. But I've realized forgiveness and love aren't the same thing either. I love my daughter. I always will. That doesn't mean I have to pretend what she did wasn't wrong, or that the consequences she's living with now aren't consequences she earned. Sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones quietly destroying something you can't see. I had a daughter who checked every box society told me to be proud of, the career, the intelligence, the accomplishments, and none of that stopped her from making a choice that unraveled a family that had nothing to do with any of it. I suppose the only thing I know for certain now is this. Raising a good person and raising a successful one are not always the same project, and I spent 34 years assuming they were.